Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is October 18, year 2022, 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and I welcome you to today's show. It's going to feature the work, and I encourage you to investigate this incredibly talented but heretofore unrecognized, except for the people who are into mystery and science and fantasy and psychic phenomena, the great John Newland, as we know. And I'm looking at the comments before the cast here. I see that some of you are familiar with the show and its content. And indeed, you want to hang on to the very end, I'm going to be showing an excerpt, depends on how much time I have at the end. I'll be showing an excerpt of the classic episode, and there were 97 of them, each directed by John Newland himself, who's the host. And for those of you who don't know, don't worry, I'm going to show a little bit of a excerpt from his first, I think it's the very first show, to give you an idea. You might have seen it, you just don't know who John Newland is, because this show has been running in syndication, also known as reruns, for years and years, somewhere in the United States of America. So we're going to talk about John Newland and two books in particular that I've relied upon in preparing for this particular talk. Number one would be One Step Beyond, appropriately. Can you see that with the reflection? And it's a decent book. I give it 4 stars. His name's John Kenneth Muir. And see, where's the other book? Where did it go to? Oh, I think I left it downstairs. Yeah, I was reading it downstairs. I'm not going to leave the camera, but I do have it cited here on my notes here. Um, Trust me, I have a copy of the book, and I've been reading. Haven't read it all the way through. It's decent as well. I give this 3 stars. It's called, let's see here. It's called Unbelievable Investigations. This is a subtitle: Investigations into Ghosts, Poltergeists, Telepathy, and Other Unseen Phenomena from the Duke Parapsychology Laboratory. And that was published in 2010. It's over a decade old. This book here came out when? Fairly recently, I think 2021. Let's see here. Oh, I'm sorry, 2006. I'm wrong. So these books are somewhat dated. I think we're due for an entire biography of John Newland himself. Very fascinating gentleman, and willing to go on an adventures, as you'll see, because I am going to, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be seeing an excerpt from that classic episode. It's lost. That is, it's never been issued as part of any collection of One Step Beyond. And thank you to the Patreon supporters. You allowed me to get this DVD set. There's 6 of them here. There's 70 episodes. Each episode ran 24 minutes. And of course, it comes out to 30 minutes with all the commercials. It ran on the ABC network on prime time at 10 o'clock at night from coast to coast. And that's why I missed it, because it started in 59. So I was a kid. I was probably in bed by that time. Mostly adults were watching this show. I didn't see it. The boomers, the baby boomers, didn't see it until it started playing in syndication. And I remember watching this show over and over again on some of the independent stations, like in my market, it was Channel 5, Channel 11, Channel 13. And I'm sure it's very similar across the United States of America. So fortunately for us, somebody it looks like a VHS recording, is really poor, recorded this episode, the lost one. It's called Sacred Mushroom, right? And we'll talk about it in a moment. And they posted it on YouTube. You can watch it there. But for Patreon subscribers, I found a better copy. When I say better, that's relatively speaking, because These were shot on they were preserved on kinescopes. They were shot to film, but they were preserved on kinescopes. They weren't really um, meant for posterity, at least in the eyes of the network people. They only became cult and legendary, and of course, source material for serious inquiry until much later. And as I told you before, I was one of the first people to um, delve seriously into television study. No one took it. The previous generation weren't used to it. They came up under radio. My parents were radio people, and all my professors, probably most of them hated television. Oh, you should be reading books, and yeah, we listened to that. I read books, but I grew up under television, and I read comic books. So the comic book connections I found out through this, well, not through this, but by reading the credits on this, that there was a character by the name of Ivan Clapper who was listed as consultant. And I said, oh, gosh, maybe he's like William Bryant, Dr. William Bryant Jr., MD, PhD, JD. Maybe he was a psychiatrist. Maybe there's that connection there. But no, I found out that his background was more pedestrian, but probably equally, if not more important. Ivan Clapper is it, and this is reveals my weakness in the area of classic comic book history. Right, I might be a quote unquote expert on television history, even though I don't know every single aspect of it. But there's people who just know everything you can imagine about comic book history. So forgive me if you are of that ilk. But Ivan Clapper is a legend. Here's in fact, he's being rediscovered by a new generation. These are being reprinted. It's that's not his artwork. He wrote for the comics. He might have done some sketching, but this typically there was a division of labor in comics. But notice, I don't know if you can see it there, but it's called, it says EC Archives. EC stands for Educational Comics. Now that was put in there because there were a lot of pressure put on by the PTA, the Parent Teacher Association. They used to wield some clout in the old days. My mother, not my dad, but my mother used to go to the PTA meetings every I think it was every month. The parents would go to school and socialize and talk to the teachers, and school was really an integral part of the community. So the PTA was a very powerful political bloc, but also the churches, particularly the Catholic Church, they still exerted moral authority. Even if you weren't Roman Catholic, they had boards of review. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. It's kind of mixed. I think in general, censorship is not something that we want to see. However, it's perfectly legitimate to advise parents about comics with decapitation or blood or whatever. It was kind of graphic. They were lurid covers. And that was a little bit slightly before my time. So what happened is there was a consortium of these publishers who did comics who said, okay, we're going to call ourselves educational comics. And I think that's why Clapper was brought in as a consultant, Ivan, because I think through his experience, political experience, lobbying and greasing congressmen or legislators or whatever it was, that and I'm just speculating here that the One Step Beyond producers brought him in because they were wary of a certain type of public outcry that's going to be waged against them. And of course, they'd be out of business at that point. All the people have to do, these lobbies, right? Mostly Roman Catholic. Bishop Fulton Sheen was a really important TV figure at the time of One Step Beyond, and actually even during the comic book controversy. It was a big deal, right? Back in the 50s, late 40s. All they'd have to do was write letters or put pressure to the Alcoa company, which was the one and only sponsor of One Step Beyond, and to be out of business. But as it is, they ran, I think 2 seasons. yeah, 59 to 61, about 2.5 seasons, I'd say. So that's a little bit of backstory there. And here's another little bit of trivia to show you the continuity. One of the founders, the guys that got together with the other publishers of magazines like this or comic books, they'd go for a nickel initially. By the time I came around, they were 10 cents and they went up to 12. But William Gaines's father was the head of educational comic books, and he was threatened to be put out of business because of all these different pressures. And then he started a separate magazine called Mad Magazine, which was inherited by his son, who really took it to a new level. That's William M. Gaines. And there's a whole story on that. His dad died, the one who founded Education Comics, in a freak, I think it was a motorboating accident. So William Gaines was thrust into that area. New York based, EC Comics was New York based, just as the golden age of television was based in New York City. This is before most operations, the executives, the actors, of course, all the production facilities were moved to Los Angeles. Los Angeles, when One Step Beyond came in, was still primarily, well, it's kind of the end stages of the studio system. In fact, the person who produced One Step Beyond was a guy named Skink, and he was from the old guard of MGM. And the movie or the show itself, One Step Beyond, was produced on the MGM lot because television was coming in, films were going out. All right. And that gives you a little bit of the backstory, the economics of shows like this. And keep this in mind as we develop our own programming going into 2022, right? These guys who started EC Comics, they were just shoestring operations, family operations, right? Maybe we're going back to that model, who knows? But anyway, the point is that John Newland was not just the host, and I'll show you his trademark introduction in a moment. He was not just the host of One Step Beyond, but he directed every single episode of, and it went to 97. And there was a huge, every season, there were just, the typical season today is like under 20 in 2022. That's still a pretty heavy schedule, but it's not like One Step Beyond. And the point I'm trying to make, and I'm finally getting to, is John Newland started out as an actor. So you can tell that he has these skills, but keep that in mind also when we watch a little bit about of the excerpt of the Sacred Mushroom, because he could be acting a little bit. We can't take this as genuine reportage. Just that's just a little bit of a caveat. Let's see here. Couple of other. Okay, I've talked about Ivan Clapper, and of course, as you're going to hear in a moment, you can't see it, but you hear it. It's the music, and the theme song is called "Fear," appropriately enough, and it's by an individual named Harry Lubin, Lubin. I tried to find as much as I could on him in preparation for this talk. I really came up with zero, so that's for you to find out. I'm most interested in finding out. I think he has formal training in composition and arranging because they didn't have synthesizers or computers back then. They had to, he might have had a transcriber, but that's a real orchestra. The strings had to be arranged and voiced properly. So I think he had that background and he might have some training in composition. My suspicion, because this is very typical, even as late as 1959, a lot of these guys came from Austria, Vienna, or Germany, right? And they might have anglicized his name. His name might have been, Heinz Lubin. I don't know, but he became Harry Lubin. So find that out because that's an additional influence that pervades these tales of the uncanny, primarily psychic phenomena, almost exclusively. And that's what makes One Step Beyond different from the Twilight Zone, which was just complete fabrication, which is fine. Fabric doesn't mean bad. It just means it's a product of the imagination. One Step Beyond purports to be based on real human events. I forgot how the phrase goes. And they take it from there. And of course, they take dramatic license and poetic license, and it has to fit into 24 minutes. But it purports to be a documentation of psychic phenomena. This is back in '59. So you think that is long time ago? It was. Yeah, it was. It was so long ago that I was a baby, right? Well, I wasn't a baby, but I think it was in first grade or something like that. But the one of the major points that I'd like to establish in this talk here is that the United States of America, I'd say even before the U.S., the colonial, going back to, you heard about the witch trials in Salem and all the dramatic iterations thereof, and you know about Edgar Allan Poe but even during the colonial times, but to the present, um, America has been a haunted land, and we can talk. That's a separate talk altogether on why that might be so. And I think a lot of it, I have to agree with. I'm working on this for the future. It's called Room 237, and one of the arguments, and this is about Stanley Kubrick, right? The Shining panelists, they're trying to decode the inner meaning of it. One of the gentlemen that they interviewed says, well, The Shining is about the Native American genocide. He's making a very good point there. And I think the American Gothic tradition is very much rooted in when I say our, I'm talking about the military and the banker people who wanted to remove the indigenous people. I think that haunting and the blood that's soaked into the soil, and of course, the Holocaust of African slavery, right, and peonage, of Irish Americans, Chinese, and subordination of different groups as they came in. I think that's part of our dark legacy. And we need to remember it instead of repressing it because, you've heard of the return of the repressed, right? Freud is all about the inability of people, human beings, being able to successfully repress trauma. He didn't use that term, I don't think. He might have at that point. But it resurfaced, and that's one of the functions of horror. That's one of the functions of mystery. That's how organized religion, I think, tends to function. And I think that's how we become susceptible to political manipulation and propaganda by all these repressed emotions, feelings, hurts, or yearnings, aspirations, hidden desires. Like Freud and his followers were very much interested in the libidinal urges that proper Jewish not Vietnamese, Viennese intellectuals, the haute bourgeoisie of his time of Vienna, the women who had quote unquote hysteria. They were all about trying to overcome sexual repression, and there's a whole history unto itself. And that doesn't change so long as we are beings that function along these four, according to Chinese medicine, it's like 5 or 6 basic appetites that human beings have, right? Including, libido or lust and hunger, jealousy, the 7 deadly sins variation on very basic. And of course, that's all being engineered out right now as we speak. That's the goal. That's really, I believe, the impetus behind bioengineering to get rid of all those hauntings. And I argue against it. I think we have to live with our pain, our sin. Call it original sin if you want, however you want to express it. We have to live with it, grapple with it, and try to reconcile it. And I don't know about overcoming it, but dealing with it. And for us, that's really what music, film, literature, poetry, rap, whatever expressive forms they are. This according to Claude Lévi-Strauss, the French anthropologist, right? He did a book called Totemism. He says this is what all people from tribal society to complex industrial societies, they have certain contradictions they have to grapple with in the culture and society, and they work it out through totemic purposes, through mythologies, through storytelling. And we get, as the Greeks said, the Ionians, so we get catharsis. It's always temporary, right? So we've got Big Pharma saying, well, okay, it's only temporary. We've got something better for you. It's called opioids. Sorry. I think that was what they're trying to put us into a permanent state of narcosis, I think. That between that and the dark mirror, otherwise known as the so-called smartphone. But I'm digressing here. So let's get back to Newland, incredible force. As I promised you, let's take a look at him as um, so I can stop babbling. Check it out. I'm going to go right to him.
Have you ever had the feeling that you knew what someone was going to say just before he said it? Or have you ever walked into a strange room and had the sensation that you'd been there before? Well, if you have, you've taken a small step beyond. Now watch a giant step. Sooner or later.
And of course, that was Harry Lubin, an excerpt from Fear that I alluded to. And here's one of his great intros.
Each of us feels the need to escape. The country folk go to the city folk go to the country. This, for example, is a very pleasant form of escape. Here on this mountaintop, we are a mere 10 miles from a city of 80,000 people, each of whom, like us, has fashioned a small cage of reality out of the chaos of unreality. Each of whom, like us, lives his life by the steady, reassuring ticking of the clock, forgetting that the clock is merely man's invention, and that tomorrow is a creation of the human mind, forgetting that there is only the constant now. But if that be true, where does that leave yesterday? Now here comes a man from that city below, that city of ticking clocks, who's about to escape his cage of reality.
He's about to escape his cage of reality. Those intros were so, even as a child, I was mesmerized by the words. And this show was done by 3 main writers, I believe. I'd like to check into their background, where they come from, where they studied, who they are. It goes on and on. But just indulge me for one more 60 seconds, right? Tell me, you get bonus points if you can tell me who this actor is that's coming out of his car into this home.
Ellen? Ellen?
Sealed tight with the stamp of the U.S. government.
You scared me.
Why?
Well, first the telephone call, and then I came up to an empty house.
Okay, that's close enough. Who is that? Anybody? Yes, it's a very, okay. Bright More Dinosaur says Warren, as in Warren Beatty. Yeah. If you watch these episodes, you'll see a lot of people who later on became fixtures on 60s television, 70s, some of them lasted to the 80s. People like Cloris Leachman, and that's just some trivia there for you. So you had top flight talent, top and bottom. And Newland came from New York. This is where all the acting talent was, because they had Broadway, they had theater, Paul Newman, Joanna Woodward, and eventually most of them, in spite of themselves, wound up in Los Angeles, right? So here we go, Warren Beatty. And by the way, just coincidentally, you know who his sister is? Shirley MacLaine is his sister. She's into, as you know, psychic phenomena and UFOs and whatnot. And there's a conference that's going to be, this is just coincidental in preparing for this. It just kind of came up in my mailbox. But there's a conference that's going to be hosted by this woman named Paola Leoprizi Harris, and she co-authored a book by Jacques Vallée, who many of you know. It's called Trinity, the Best Kept Secret. It's about, well, I won't go into it because I'm going to get into a long digression. But she endorsed this not a little, it's going to be a conference. It's going to be in November in New Mexico, that's going to be dealing with these very same issues that we're talking about today. And I'm just mentioning this to show you that uh, this type of interest amongst the general public, and I'm going to have to say, even within academia, I always rank on academia, but I see a change, a transformation going there. People are returning to classics, and they're also studying. They don't necessarily use the word occult, but that's really what it amounts to. I'm seeing more and more scholarly interest in that. And my argument is that if you present it to undergraduates, that's going to naturally drive out GLBTQ hegemony. It's going to be driving out so-called critical race theory propaganda, which is not social science, it's not anthropology, it's ideology. It's ideology sponsored by the corporations. And by the way, the corporation that's sponsored one step beyond is Alcoa, the aluminum, right? And they cut the cord after 3 seasons. They figured they can just spend their money and getting into people's heads in other ways, but they were trying to get into our heads, and that's with what that woman calls, the one who wrote the book, which I didn't have. Sorry, unbelievable. Stacey Horn, that she's the author of it. She refers to it as the paranormal boom. She said there was a 50s paranormal boom. Now, I disagree with her because, by the way, part of her working method was that she went into this just looking for a project, but she found a treasure trove, boxes and boxes of documents for this Duke University parapsychology research group. And I mention that because even within US academia, there has historically been a huge interest in psychic phenomena, right? This whole scientific, technocratic interlude that's lasted about 50 years now is an interregnum between the early days of American universities, late 19th century, early 20th century, with such eminent names as William James of Harvard, I think it was Harvard College back then, of Harvard, who wrote the magnificent book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, right? He's just one of the bigger names that you might recognize, but there were any number of them. It was common. It was not seen as woo-woo. It was accepted. And then I think what happened is that Alcoa Corporation and the Rockefeller Foundation, which funded the Duke operation, and then they pulled the plug. Rockefeller also funded Kinsey at the University of Indiana, and they pulled the plug there. That's how they whipsaw you. They put a chain on you, the golden handcuffs, if you will, and get you used to that money, build your staff up, invest your professional career into these areas, and then they yank the chain back, say, well, we're cutting you off unless you do it our way. So all you expectant heads of research laboratories, whether it be in bioscience, whatever it may be, mRNA research, or humanities, that's what you're getting into. Better to retain your independence. You may wind up like me, but everything you do is going to be 100% you and not Rockefeller or Soros, right? These people are the ones today are laptop, but that's changing, as I told you. Okay, so we see this happening, but it even precedes the Duke operation, Duke Parapsychology Laboratories, it's called. It goes back into, at least in the modern period, the mid 19th century, 1850 to I guess up to World War II. World War II was really the the transition point where they're going to go. We're going to go full technocratic, and we're going to try to minimize any talk about psychic. We'll give the public a little bit of it in UFOs, but we're really going to just bring a bunch of people from Taiwan and from Germany, a paperclip, and go full technocratic control and build up this infrastructure that will enslave humanity, right? And of course, if we can make some progress in remote viewing or telekinesis or psi, right? We can fund some operating. CIA, you know about SRI. I'm not going to go there. Everybody's given talks on SRI and Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann, blah blah blah. Great work, great, good on you. Don't tell me I need to watch this stuff because I've seen it all. All right, I'm doing my thing. I'm trying to shift the focus in a way that's equally as productive, if not more so. So instead of telling me what I should be watching, listen to what I'm telling you. Pay attention here. Here is none other, and I'm picking the most obvious, the most prominent name. You know, author Conan Doyle, right? He's a knight of the realm. He's Sir the British realm, not my realm. He's great in the realm of the supernatural and detection. And you know his hero Sherlock Holmes. He's the master of induction, and induction is really hyper empiricism, right? You can build a theory on all the different facts that you can connect together. That's induction. Deduction is coming up with a theory and then finding uh, points of confirmation, and it's always tentative. The very idea of science now is always tentative. We're all trying to refine it or make it more precise. It's not written in stone. Remember, it's the theory of evolution. Darwin never say this is the holy writ. Yeah, it's forever and ever more. This is what a lot of technocrats tend to forget. And just like the people who tell me I need to read so and so, once it's in their mind, they can't get out of it. Right? It's instilled that this is who has done it all. He said, you know, it's the last word. Malachi Martin is the last word. He's the last great Catholic cleric, not Vigano. You won't listen to Vigano, what he has to say. You're talking about a dead man whose work is great, and I've read. All right. So I'm just telling you that this is part of the barriers that keep us from advancing. And even the Conan Doyle freaks, the Sherlock Holmes people who know every single aspect of Sherlock Holmes' fictional life, right? And Dr. Watson, right? And they know all the references. I mean, these truly nerd out, but they miss the big picture. And the big picture is that this is the repressed part of the Anglo-American English-speaking culture built upon conquest and subjugation of people, colonialism, it's called imperialism, the world over. And I guess the burden of that is just too enormous to bear. It comes out. And that's how I understand Sherlock Holmes, the character, and that's how I understand Conan Doyle, who has written extensively on psychic phenomena. I have this one book. You can find it for free online. It's in the public domain. But if you want a nice copy, you can go on Amazon. And I said, and I've only started reading. I said, my gosh, Conan Doyle was a polymath, and that's one of the big differences between a Conan Doyle and a Stephen King. Those people of that era, right? Bram Stoker, a little bit earlier, and Robert E. Howard in America. They were people. They were learned. They might not have been to university. Some have, but many have. But they were learned. Stephen King is learned by reading Robert E. Howard and comic books. Those are his masters. These people were reading the classical masters. That's Conan Doyle. That's why his literary work endures to this day, and that's why his intellectual work is more his nonfiction work. Let's call it to make it palatable to you. is worth investigating. And I encourage you to read Conan Doyle on psychic. And he was very much acquainted. He was really on top. Surprisingly, I didn't realize communication was so good back then, but he's really on top of what was going on in the American scene in terms of sisters or brothers or certain psychics that were being promoted or trying to be debunked or studied by academic types who were seriously investigating. So anyway, there's a guy named I forgot his name, but he did a short piece on Conan Doyle as a person who was in tune or studying the spirit world. He also a believer in the spirit world, but he's also studying it.
If ever an author needed a PR campaign to establish their reputation, well, Arthur Conan Doyle was no such person. His prolific writing did that for him perfectly well, not least because his creation of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson gave British literature the most popular detective duo of all time. Indeed, Sherlock Holmes is so well known that Doyle's birthplace in Piccadilly Place, Edinburgh, is actually marked by a statue of Holmes and not the author himself. Perhaps a statue of Doyle would have been more appropriate, like this one in Crowborough, where he lived and died.
And
Add to Holmes and Watson Doyle's science fiction stories, Adventurer, and an...
Let me cut that off. Yeah, Edinburgh University was the center of the Scottish Enlightenment, and that whole area was the center of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. I don't have to rehearse that. And a young Arthur Conan Doyle or R.D. Doyle, whatever it was called when he was a boy, couldn't have. I mean, he was steeped in it. Maybe probably relatives. I haven't read a full length critical biography of Conan Doyle, but I really should. But I'm just assuming that it was just part of his mother's milk, so to speak, and it filtered through here. And as we know, the audience remains strong in 2022. And again, why does it remain strong? Because a lot of it, if you read the books, it's kind of slightly archaic, and the movies starring the best ones, I believe, are the ones with Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce, but there have been many other versions of it, right? And they might seem a little quaint and archaic, People aren't typically, Americans especially, they want to see Lady Gaga. They don't want to see these fusty gentlemen wearing Edwardian, suits with 3 buttons, or ladies wearing, hats. But it's that spirit. It's that repressed spirit that we're seeing here. Okay, what are the points that I want to make about gosh, I wish I had that book to show you. It's called Stacy Horn Unbelievable. Okay, let me just talk a little bit about the psychology department. It was run by a guy named J.B. Rhine, R-H-I-N-E, doctor. And he was a biologist. I think he was an entomologist, like our friend Alfred Kinsey, who was a specialist in wasp gulls, right? Drosophila, which the animal experimenters still use Drosophila, trying to figure out how they can queer the animal kingdom or the insect world, right? So he was a biologist as well. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not. Also funded by Rockefeller, right? Rockefellers, to their credit, would explore. They put their money on anything that they thought they can consolidate their political power and wealth, right? And I think they still have their hand in there secretly or through front organizations, let's say Soros or whoever else. I'm just using Soros as a name, but I'm sure they have other, it could be the Tides Fund, whatever. In less popular woo-woo type of, UFOs. That's what I'm guessing. And I'm mentioning that because that's one of the reasons why the capitalists, the globalists, the New World Order people, that's one of the reasons why they stay in power, because they will put their money and their energies, their resources for generations into something that we might just dismiss. So we dismiss this type of phenomena at our peril, right? They get to have all the fun and the power and the wealth and transgenerational wealth. Okay, so we found this at Duke, but I found this interesting. This is what Stacey Horn taught me, and unbelievable, that America in general in the popular media was completely, even before One Step Beyond, even before Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, back in the 30s, the average American was completely into, they might not be subscribers to it because they might have been living in the Bible Belt. They might be religious, right? But they'd still be kind of reading the magazines about psychic phenomena, or later to be called ESP. And this was going on by the mid 30s, early 30s and mid 30s. Life magazine and all of the mass magazines were big back then. They were the number one mass. Well, I don't know, maybe radio was big, but they were huge. We don't see any print magazines, very few nowadays, but they were in the parlor, on the table of most American, even poor families had magazines because, they pass them on, right? So he was featured. J.B. Rhine, his grad students, his staff people. Oh, there was also his wife. Let's not forget her. She was a very important partner in the prominence of the Duke Parapsychological Laboratory. She was also a PhD. I don't know what area it is. Probably biology. Her name was, I think it was Leo. I can't remember her. She had a nickname and she had a standard name, but she did a lot of the writing, administrative and journal writing. I mean, it was a complete operation. And Duke University was not the Duke University you know today. Excuse me. They didn't have the big, Division I basketball powerhouse. It was kind of like, it was like Tobacco Road. It's part of the tobacco. The Duke family were big tobacco people. Doris Duke was the tobacco heiress, just to give you a little bit of backstory. But it was, and J.B. Rhine had to be really tempted by full funding to leave. He was at Harvard. I think he studied under Hugo Munsterberg at Harvard. I'm not really sure. I can't remember. I'll have to don't quote me on that. But Harvard had probably the number one, maybe Clark University or Clark College, but Harvard had the number one. William James was there, and they didn't call it psychology. They might have been part of the philosophy department at that time. But that's where Ryan came out. He went to Harvard and went down to Tobacco Road to Duke, and he got set up. And as you know, wealthy people love psychic phenomena, especially widower women, right? They want to communicate with their dead husbands or their dead boyfriends or both. I don't know. So he would get a lot of money through that way. They got tons of correspondence. This is in the Stacey Horn book, unbelievable. Thousands of letters per year, and so did One Step Beyond. And because John Newland, the host and the director of the show, writes about this. Fortunately, we're in the television age, so a lot of this is documented. We got to John Newland, we being historians, got to him before he died at a ripe old age. He got letters as well from, because it showed at 10 o'clock at night, prime time, ABC. All the children were asleep. So these were letters from sophisticated, adults, and many of them were professionals. It shocked him that there was such an audience for this type of material, which still holds water so far as I'm concerned. So anyway, I'll talk about J.B. Rhine a little bit later. That's a name that you might not be familiar. You know everything there is about paperclip Nazis, because Nazis are sexy. They have sexy uniforms and they have sexy characters like, Ernst Röhm and Werner von Braun. But J.B. Rhine, come on, write that down and check him out, right? He was an important propaganda person, I would imagine, opening that portal to psychic, good, bad, or ugly. J.B. Rhine was Rhine, was the man. Okay, I promised you I was going to share a little bit about from that classic episode. It's Lost. And if you go to my Patreon, I'll give you, remember this is 1960 vintage technology, so you can't expect pristine, but I have a better copy of this that'll be on my Patreon that you'll find on YouTube. It has a lot of surface noise on it. It's almost unlistenable. This one's a good copy because I have my own sources, which I will share with my Patreon people. I'm spinning it back to you, right? Right. You allow me to gather research material while I'm sharing the wealth with you. Here is that great. And if you're not a patron, you can watch the ugly, noisy copy on YouTube, right? Everybody gets a peek at it. But here's a glimpse.
This member of the mushroom family, this fungus, is for the moment known only as X. It was discovered barely weeks ago growing in a remote rainforest. Science has not yet given it a name, for science knows scarcely anything about it. But it is felt that X might have one remarkable quality, that it stimulates extrasensory perception, enabling the mind to become telepathic and clairvoyant. Now that's a rather large claim. Is it true or false? The answer to that question took us on a unique and distant journey. We're in Mexico, thousands of miles from our Hollywood sound stages in a place called Mitla, on the very edge of civilization. There are no actors, there's no script. For this psychic report can only be recorded at the moment it happens. Here in the plaza of the kings of Zapotec, here in the antiquity of Mexico, we begin a search whose ending, at this very moment of filming, we do not know. We are searching for something far older than these ruins, which, if found, could hurtle an ordinary man infinitely beyond his five senses. And now the first step beyond. The first step is a faltering one. We wait day after day for perfect flying weather. For the only way to reach our goal, the inaccessible village of Juquila, is by light plane over trackless mountains. Has he come back yet?
No.
Well, keep your fingers crossed. This lovely hacienda at the foot of the Dombac Mountains has been here a little longer than we have, but not much. From here, weather permitting, our chartered plane will fly us to a remote mountain village to look for, of all things, a mushroom. But a very strange mushroom indeed, with powers beyond belief. And here are the mushroom hunters, as improbable a group as you will find anywhere. For instance, this is Dr. Barbara Brown, brilliant neuropharmacologist of the University of California at Los Angeles. With her is David Gray, one of the last kahunas of Hawaii, a spiritual leader whose line goes back 900 years and whose quest for knowledge beyond the world of materialism has led him everywhere in the world. And now here, and here, with friend, is Jeffrey Smith, a distinguished professor of philosophy and humanities at Stanford University. And now, and mighty important, is our translator, William Upson, a missionary who has lived among the people of our remote village for the last 9 years, and the only man in the world who speaks their language.
The pilot says he'll be ready soon, John.
And last, our forever optimistic, Dr. Andrei Puharish, who wrote the astounding book, The Sacred Mushroom. Dr. Puharish's book brought us here in the first place, and in it, he explains how the mushroom seems to have an incredible effect on the power of extrasensory perception.
Incredible is the word. We're here for some very specific purposes. We want to know why these people here in Mexico have kept this right so secret for so many centuries. But I would say that our prime mission is to explore and examine the biochemicals present in these new mushrooms and find out if they can be of any benefit in this problem of mental disease.
What Dr. Paharish hasn't told you, it is not all as simple as it sounds. The last time he was here, looking for the mushroom, a man was shot.
And shot at.
And another man was driven out of his mind.
For a while?
El piloto dice que ya. In English, dice que ya means the pilot said, now.
Okay, a lot of you in the live chat will recognize Andrei Puharich, right? Later affiliated with the Stanford Research Institute, all those characters that I alluded to earlier. This is one of his early, by the way, he'd already been written up in, I think, in Life magazine, and Gordon Wasson, other people like that have already been pushed to the fore by the Loose Machine Time magazine and Life magazine in order to perhaps stimulate research money or funding or popular interest to support it, right? So this is part of the reason why Alcoa is involved, I think. But then in addition to Puhadish, who most of us know, and I didn't know if this woman Brown or the other guy, one she's from, UCLA and the other one's from Stanford. And then you have a kahuna who's 900-year genealogy. A kahuna is like a priest. He's like the top religious figure in the Hawaiian Islands. I'd be interested to find out how John Newland or his producers assembled that team. Like I said, there needs to be a full-length biography on John Newland. And beyond, this guy did a good job, but it's mostly capsule summaries of each episode. And there's some insight, critical insight, not very much. It's more of just sort of a workman-like exposition. By the way, before I still have about 10 minutes here, but I wanted to mention before the end of this particular talk that I just got this book the other day. I'm starting to read. It's called A Rebel King. It's by the biographer Tom Bauer. And I was reminded by the fact that the British King Charles is very much into psychic phenomenon. He's into spiritualism. And he's very open to this. So who knows what he's going to do as king, good, bad, or ugly. Yeah, I know he's king of the world, at least wants to be and wants to stay there. But there might be some hope there that he's involved there. And I first came to that realization when I found this paperback, which is out of print. It's called The Prince and the Paranormal. Right, I didn't have a copy here, but I'll post it on my Patreon. I'll have an excerpt so that my Patreon group can get a backstory on how the prince, he was prince then, but now the King of England got into and by the way, the royals, those bloodlines, that's not atypical. That's standard, right? So I think part of the reason why the public is made to feel ashamed or guilty, it's a guilty pleasure about exploring these topics, is it so the people who are in control of the world can maintain it, the true secrets, or we get some debased version of it, right? It's called X-Files. Sorry to, if I offended you X-File freaks, because, it's a cult, right? You got to believe in this and that. Otherwise, you're a bad person. Okay, let's return to, in fact, I'm going to skip to the end because this is where, and by the way, this is not typical of One Step Beyond. They're usually dramatic, like the Warren Beatty one. They're dramatic stories, recreations. This one's here is a full-blown, quote-unquote, documentary. But remember, he's an actor too. So, and there's editing involved. So you can't really swallow this whole hog either. You can, but it's your own risk. So let's take a look. Let's go back here. I'm going to speed it up to the end when they start testing their psychic ability.
And we're a long way from...
Okay, here's Newland in Palo Alto, which is the home of Stanford University. But this is the private home / laboratory of Andrei Puharich. Now, what happened is the Alcoa, they're a globalist, right, metals company, Or they're not just the aluminum foil people. They go to the jungles of the Amazon and Africa and extract extract whatever they need from the land and leave it big gaping holes in the population, impoverished peasants, right? But they said they're not going to run it. It's too weird. That's why it's a lost episode. That's why you're seeing something here unique. So Puhadish, I think it was himself, said, well, why don't we put you, John Newland, in the show, taking some magic mushrooms and experimenting with some some psychic, I guess it would be called remote viewing now, right? And we're going to test you. We're going to see. And spoiler alert, because we might not get to the end, John Newland does demonstrate, you can quantify this, enhanced psychic ability after he takes the shrooms. Okay, here we go. We're in Palo Alto now. Right. Here we go.
From our remote mountain village of Juquila in Mexico. We're also a long way from the secret rites of the sacred mushroom cult. But our search for the truth about the mushroom, that is the truth as we understand it, is far from over. These men are our technical crew who have come with me from Los Angeles to help us continue our search. We've come to the home and laboratory of Dr. Andrei Puharish in Northern California. For me, personally, this next step beyond may be a rather large one. This is part of the laboratory and study of Dr. Puharish. Here among his solid and sound books of orthodox medicine, there are also other books. They are written in French, in Spanish, in English. Here's one that says, Mushrooms, Russia, and History. They're written in Syrian, Japanese, all the languages of the world. And they're all concerned with one thing, the same thing, the riddle of the sacred mushroom. Now, when we were in Mexico, the brujo who discovered the stolen burro might have been coincidence. And the other brujo who told Dr. Barbara Brown about her past illness might have made a wild guess. But today, we should be able to prove the case for or against the mushroom, the sacred mushroom, with quite a lot more accuracy.
What's that now, John?
Those the mushrooms you brought back from Mexico?
Yes.
Andre, how many people have you tested since you've been back?
You'll be number 26.
What about the results?
Encouraging. The average of the group as a whole, and the series is quite small, you understand, shows evidence for extrasensory perception after taking the mushrooms.
Well, I'm ready. Maybe I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be.
Well, not quite yet. We have to do some control tests first to see if you have any ESP before you take the mushroom.
Oh, I see.
And these will be done with cards, pictures, and books.
I see.
Now you just sit still there.
In the interest of time, I'm going to move this up.
No, I might try to be a great big tall buildings. Extrasensory perception at all.
That's what the test
Well, what do we
shows.
do now?
Now to eat the mushroom.
All right, I'm ready. Maybe that'll improve me. Which ones are we going to eat? You have so many here, Andre. Which one is mine?
These are for you. These are... Chew them well when you ingest. Not bad, are they?
Tastes just like mushrooms.
And one more for you.
Oh, dry. All right. What now?
Now we'll lie you down on the bed.
What for?
We'll do some physical testing before the effects of the mushroom take hold.
Like what? I mean, like what effects?
You'll find out. Well, it's been about 20 minutes since you had the mushroom, John. How do you feel?
Fine. I feel strong, sort of. You know, it's kind of hard to. Strong, a sense of. Kind of sense of well-being. Is that?
Yes, some people feel that way. Let's try something. I want you to stand right up here in front of this light.
Yeah.
Yes, close your eyes and tell me what you see. Lower your head a little bit. A little more. Now.
Oh, I see it. Now I see it. I see so many things I can't tell you. Can't you slow it?
Slow it.
Now I see but I see so many colors that are. Go.
Are they pretty?
In geometric signs that now there's like great things. They're magnificent. That's what they are. They're magnificent. I have never been so aware of color. It makes me quite dizzy. I feel like I would like to dive into the middle of it.
Well, we'll try the card test again.
Now.
All right, same way. Start with your left.
Okay, we're running out of time, so you know what happens. He aces the test. His psychic abilities go off the charts, and Dr. Puhadic is testing him in that regard. So there you go. And remember, he's an experienced actor of live, of Broadway theater as well as live television in the golden age of television, and the director of One Step Beyond. So there might be a little bit of acting going on there. But the point is that this is what this show, sponsored by Alcoa Presents, right, is doing in 1960. It might have been 61, but around that time. And I will conclude with warning: the typical knee-jerk reaction seems to be nowadays, right? Just like Nazis are sexy, and right, it's the same old, watch out for the Freemasons, blah blah blah. Wolf. The common tendency, while it was just a CIA operation, the hippies and the countercultural CIA, Ken Kesey, SR, right? No, it's much deeper. It's more extensive than that. And probably the idea that it's all a CIA operation, Operation MS Chaos, is probably done. It's probably a psyop from them saying, yeah, it's conspiracy theory, that we're creating, and we're going to pretend that we're exposing ourselves, right? Because it gives them more power, right? It gives them more fear and intimidation factor of the population. So I want to warn, that's all I'll say about that. Because again, there's a lot of cult people saying it's a CIA, and they don't want to go. It's the Annie Jacobson approach. No, they want to seal it off and prevent any further inquiry. No, I think the inquiry starts now in 2022, and it might be 1, 2, 3, or maybe multiple people who are watching this video who are going to pick up the ball where John Newland left off. All right. You don't see very many people, media figures doing. I think I saw Gwyneth Paltrow in one of her stupid shows getting high on DMT, or it was all very controlled and contrived as well. But anyway, there's hope, right? God gave us a beautiful fauna and flora, right, and a pharmacopoeia. I don't know if that's the proper way of characterizing it, but ancient man knew how to harness it and use it for their own purposes. And I'm saying it's good for our civilization, 2022. Probably not. We're already overstimulated. We're probably already in a state of permanent hypnagogia, right? Just like previous talks I've given, thanks to the dark mirror, right? The iPhone, and I think something like 60 or 70% of Americans, and includes children, are on meds. They're on pharmaceuticals. So to add ayahuasca, as Joe Rogan is trying to promote, or at least he used to until recently, and some of these other hipster dudes, the real cool people who are exploring consciousness like they discovered consciousness, I think that's really dangerous, and I think it's unwise. And it's like Jordan Peterson telling someone who calls in on the phone, Jordan Peterson, you're the guru that the Canadian Five Eyes PSYOPs people appointed as the one professor who's telling the truth. Says, I'm depressed. Well, take your meds. Take your psychotropics. Wow, that's really bad practice. That's unethical. And I'm sorry that he himself had his own mental health problems, but I'm saying that we know historically, culturally, if you want to look back decades, even millennia, that other people have found solutions. And you know where most of them derive from? They derive from the top of the pyramid. Yeah, the old Aztec chieftains and the priests who were doing all the human sacrifice back then. Why, they're still in business, except they work for the National Institutes of Mental Health or the Pentagon. All right. So let's free ourselves. All glory to God and the beautiful world that He has made for us. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. Explore John Newland. You can see a lot of those separate episodes on TubeView. I think someone posted most of them, right? Or get cleaner copies through Bezos.com. And so you'll be entertained, but you'll also be highly enlightened by really good artistry and writing and music all the way down. All right. Thanks again, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you, God willing, on Thursday with another One Step Beyond. Bye.